Stamina is a very confusing stat in the game at first, because a lot of people don't understand how much stamina you actually need for races, because when they do career, they realize, well, I passed through the entire career with only 200 stamina, so surely I don't need that much for PvP or for other parts of the game. But this is not actually how it works. In fact, when you're doing career, you have an invisible stat boost of 400 to each stat, meaning that actually, if you're able to pass with 200 stamina, that would mean you'd actually need 600 stamina in an actual race. Now on screen, as we can see here, these are the stat requirements for different positions and different lengths of races. It also has consideration for how many gold stamina skills you have, which are the blue skills with the golden outline. The reason why this is important to take into consideration is because each position actually has a different stamina multiplier, which I'll put on screen as well. And because there are different stamina multipliers, this actually makes it so that different positions will consume and use a different amount of stamina, and they actually have different ways that they consume stamina as well and gain stamina back. One other thing you're going to want to take into consideration with positions is how much power they need, because when you do not have enough power, you actually need to use more stamina to accelerate, and this can deplete a lot of your stamina if you're not hitting the proper amount of power. Now typically power is considered to be acceleration, and the more acceleration you have, that means that you won't have to use as much stamina to make up for the acceleration. So for late surgers and end closers, you're going to want the most amount of power, and for pace chaser, you're also going to want a decent amount of power. For front runners, you don't need as much power because your main focus should be speed. When you are a front runner, you want to stay at the front, because if a front runner actually falls behind even slightly, then they usually won't have enough power to be able to push through, because keep in mind, you need power to push through the pack. So if you're a front runner and you start to fall behind, you're going to need power to push through. Now, this can also take up a lot of stamina consumption. So make sure that you guys are having enough power, because if you don't have enough power, then you're going to have to use more stamina to push through, meaning that your stamina is going to want to be higher. So make sure that while you are hitting the stamina checkpoints and having enough golds and all of that you have enough power so that you also don't waste a lot of stamina. And the same thing also can go for wit. And if you have lower wit, then you can also end up using too much stamina as well. So keep in mind that there are a lot more factors to stamina than just these checkpoints. And that's one thing that has been criticized about this table, especially considering how JP players see it. They've criticized this table a bit because it doesn't take into consideration everything, especially wit and power. And that's because wit and power, as I just mentioned, have a big impact on your stamina consumption and also your speed, especially when it comes to front runners. If you have low speed as a front runner, then your front runner falls behind, meaning that they have to use more stamina to catch back up. So with all those considerations in mind, this table is still pretty useful for general checkpoints, but you do want to make sure you have at least around 400 wit. And then depending on whether you're a pace chaser, late surger, or end closer, the more power the better, especially as you get further back towards end closer and late surger. And pace chasers need a bit of power, but definitely not as much as late surgers and end closers. Front runners can benefit from power, especially if they don't have enough speed, but they do typically want to stay at the head of the pack and just speed blitz anyone anyways. So if you have high enough speed, then you typically won't have to worry about power as much. But do keep in mind that while training speed, you can use somebody like Kita-san to give the extra power bonus in training to give you a decent amount of power. So if your front runner for some reason has a late start and falls behind as a front, but they'll still be able to catch up later. Another important thing to talk about is regarding the recovery skills. So I'll put both of these on screen, all three, I believe, of the screenshots that are helpful for this. And the reason why all this is important is because recovery skills aren't actually guaranteed to activate. Now, the reason why they're not guaranteed to activate is because skill activation is dependent on wit. Now, if we're using this for PvP, if you just do a lot of races, then eventually it will start to even out and you'll be able to get your high scores, considering you only need to get one high score a week, and you can get up to 70 runs a week just for free, as long as you're sending in every 10 hours. And that should be enough time to negate a lot of the luck that's happening. But do keep in mind, 400 wit can be a good area to go for, because that's when the diminishing returns really start to kick in. 300 wit has the 70% activation per skill, and it goes up to 75 or 77.5% for the 400, and then it only goes up around 4.5% to going to 500. So 400 can be a pretty good sweet spot. And as you guys can see on the table, as you start to go up more, that chance of activation actually decreases a lot more. So this table also may be kind of confusing to read, but basically what it means is as the first number will show how many, the chance of activating that amount of gold recovery skills, assuming you have the second number of gold recoveries. So the first one is 1 gold recovery, assuming that you have 1 gold recovery skill, that would be 70% chance. And then the second one is the chance that 1 recovery skill activates, assuming you have 2 gold recoveries, which is 91. And the same thing goes on for later. Like the 2 gold recoveries is chance of 2 activating if you have 2 is about 50%. Chance of 2 activating if you have 3 is 78%. And it's kind of like that for the rest of the table as well. So it can be a little bit confusing to look at first, but that's basically how it works. And you can see that there's a lot of diminishing returns as you start to go further up at the table, and 400, I would say 400 to 500 is usually a very good amount to go for. If you can get 400, 500, a lot of builds are able to get 600 pretty easily too if you're running 1 wit card, but depending on what you want to run, you may want to save your stuff for other stats. But one of the things that is useful, which I'm going to be making a future video on, is that if you run, for example, not a speed spark, right? Speed sparks are less valuable because of Kida-san's existence, because you can hit max speed even without any speed sparks, just with like 4 characters. So if you're using like 4 speed characters, 2 stamina, and then also running like a stamina spark for a long race, you could run like 2 stamina sparks, 2 stamina characters, and then 4 speed, be able to hit max speed, and then also pretty much be able to hit max stamina. It does make it a lot easier if you can run stuff that is not speed sparks, right? Because that will allow you to potentially run another wit card. For short distance racers, a very popular build has been 4 speed, 2 power. But if you run a power spark or multiple power sparks, you can replace some of those power sparks, some of those power support units that you're running, for a wit character instead, which can actually help quite a bit in terms of getting extra wit if you wanted to go for the higher recovery. Now, the next thing we'll talk about in terms of the aptitudes, right? This is actually going to be important as well, because you can get your aptitudes up by borrowing specific horses. Now, the reason though this is important to consider is because you could actually just use the database, the Musume database, to find exactly what you're looking for, which could then boost your stats further. Now, when looking at aptitudes, you're going to want to primarily look at track and distance. Style can give a decent amount of wit boost, but it's overall not the best. It's definitely more important to focus on distance and track. So track will mainly focus on your acceleration, pretty much just your power. And this can be very helpful because having higher acceleration means you need to use less stamina to accelerate, which can overall help with stamina as well. And the second one is going to help your speed. So that's whether you're sprint, mile, medium, or long. You can get S's in these pretty easily just by borrowing the right characters, as I'll show you in a second here after we talk about this. And you can get up to like a 5% boost in terms of your acceleration in your speed from getting from A to S. So borrowing characters with 9-star sparks that also have 3-star maybe in your 2 track and distance can actually help quite a bit. Now, style can raise your wit by up to 10%, right? And this can help with skill activation, as we talked about earlier. And the more skills that you activate in team trials, the more points that you will actually be able to get from it. So it can help a lot as well when you're starting to look at that type of stuff. So that should be everything that you guys need to know about stamina, at least right now. It may get a little bit more complicated in the future, especially with some changes to the meta and other types of classes coming out. But for now, I hope you guys were able to find a lot of this video helpful and a lot of the graphs that I made to be very helpful. I took most of this information from the global reference document and then changed up a little bit of what they were talking about just to make a little bit more sense. And all of this from my experience in JP has been pretty useful. I played in JP a decent amount, so I have a pretty decent familiarity with PvP and how the game works, especially as time goes on. So if you want to see more videos talking about guides and me using some of my experience to help you guys with the game, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys later.